Can I have volunteers for microphones today? Yeah, Taylor and anyone on the other side? Yeah.
Just before you leave, let's just...
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Were you on mute, Pete?
No, I'm on. You probably just need to ask your row to stick along so you can sit on the end. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Si.
Last day.
Last day of the trip for us.
Last day.
Yeah.
42
Time
days.
to sleep.
Yeah. Time to sleep.
Time to sleep, yeah. Good. Okay.
When we get home.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll have a catch up when we get home.
Got to get through the flight of non-sleep.
Yeah, it's a 17-hour flight.
And you got to adjust the time again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We find going around the world this direction is a bit easier on the time zone changes.
Yeah, the body clock adjusts easier.
Do you arrive on the same day then?
No, we leave on Tuesday and we arrive on Thursday.
Oh,
15
wow.
15 hours. We fly for 15 hours, I think it is.
15,
Yeah. So we leave LA at 8:30 on Tuesday night and we arrive in Brisbane at 5 a.m. on Thursday morning. Wow.
Because Australia's 15 hours ahead of you here.
Yeah. Now since the adjustment, last night is 15. Yeah. Yeah, it'd be strange to be back in Australia.
The guys have been madly working away on the shed. It's got a roof on it now and everything.
Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah. So our water collection shed's almost done. Now we've got to put the water in. I've been pretty busy while we've been away. All right. How are we feeling this morning?
Very good.
Good? Nothing really frightened of, it's all truth. Yeah. It's funny, isn't it, how we have this sort of feeling sometimes that that truth is scary, but actually what I've found myself is that living in ignorance is much, much scarier. Because you don't really know what's going on or why it's going on or anything like that. So truth is just such a freeing thing rather than a scary thing. So that's a false belief. There's an example of one false belief, that the truth is scary. Okay. The subject matter today, remember we're still on the beliefs matter. And so what's going to happen today is I'm going to just talk a little bit about the human soul, but again from the focus of beliefs. And so this is not going to be by any means an exhaustive discussion about the human soul. It's going to be a very rudimentary discussion about the soul. And there's just a few basic things that I want to say to you before Mary and I leave for we're away from you guys for 11 months, right? Pretty much. So, there's a few things I wanted to cover with you before we go.
Homework for the next 11 months. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, so what I would like to do is just talk about a few basic things about the human soul. For some of you, it might be a reminder, but I think we want to approach it too from the point of view of beliefs. And we haven't really done that before. So this is what we want to cover. So we're talking about how the human soul works in particular.
Well, we called it yesterday, didn't we? What the human soul does.
Yeah, or you could say what the human soul does. Or you could say how it's been designed. The design of it, how it's been designed to operate. As you know, if you are aware of how anything operates and you're aware of its design, you can get the best out of it. And it's the same with the soul. If you become aware of the design of your soul, that's when you get the best out of your soul in terms of how it operates and works. So that's the subject that we really would like to talk a bit about today. So I'm going to need the whole workspace, so I'm going to rub that off and start with the whole space. Here's your soul. We discussed a few weeks ago that it was dual in nature, meaning that it has two components, two halves, you could say. And those two halves are predominantly happening during you could say, the developmental phase of your soul. By the time the soul has sort of fully become aware of itself, the two halves no longer really exist. Make sense? Okay. But for the purpose of our discussion, we've got the two halves of our soul. So this is, each person is a soul. Now, you can see straight away that because the soul has two halves, if the two halves act as though they are independent to each other, which is what the majority of people on earth are doing, acting as if they are independent, then of course it's like each half is an independent unit. That's what it feels like to each half during the early phases of your development. So, remember yesterday we talked to Eugene, and he was in the fifth sphere, and in the fifth sphere you start learning God's perception of what you are rather than your perception of what you are. And what he was starting to try to feel was how God defined his, not only just his personality or his nature, but also how God defined his soul. Up until the fifth sphere, generally what happens is the average person believes themselves to be an individual. But when you start receiving truth from God about your soul, you start realising that you're not an individual. You're only half of an individual. And you start receiving from God emotionally. Remember, this is anything you receive from God has to be emotional. It can't be intellectual. You start receiving from God the emotional feelings of what it feels to not be an individual. You're half of the soul, not being an individual. And that's quite confronting, because up until that time, generally, we've believed ourselves to be one. And so, as regards receiving any truth from God, it is always going to be an emotional process, and that applies to what I'm going to talk to you about with regard to the human soul today. At the moment, I'll be presenting to you concepts or ideas which you can intellectually sort of grasp or understand. But that doesn't mean you understand the human soul. Until you feel these things, you will not understand it. And you won't understand even the importance of grasping the truth about the soul until you feel your soul. So this is something that's very tricky at the beginning when you start learning concepts like this, because on the natural love path, there are universities in the spirit world in particular that teach you all sort of things that the spirits who are natural love spirits have learnt, and some of those things are teaching you things about the human soul. And the average person on the natural love path is using their intellect, their mind, to try to grasp and understand what the human soul is. And for many people that's quite attractive, to grasp it with their mind first, because they have a large level of control over their feelings when they do that. Right? So that's the problem with doing this, is that you can control your soul using an appendage of the soul. So if we look at the soul, it obviously has appendages. Now, if we're a heterosexual soul, then obviously one half will be male and the other half will be female. And so it'll be attracted to, the male will be attracted to a male body, and the female will be attracted to the female body, right? So this is a physical body and the spirit body. And then on this side, you've got the same thing, where you've got your spirit body. And I've drawn it a bit bigger just to illustrate to you that it does have, you could say, a superset of the functionality of the physical body. So I'm just sort of putting it in some relative position here. So at the time of incarnation, which for all of you was a time of conception, shortly after conception, the cells start multiplying quite rapidly, and there's a certain time after it receives so many multiplications of cells, and the soul connects to the bodies, and actually the soul provides the energy for the multiplication of the cells inside of the womb to continue. If if the soul doesn't connect, there's an immediate abortion of the organism, but there was no soul on it connected to it anyway, so it's not what I would classify to be an abortion at that point, or a miscarriage at that point, because the soul was yet to connect to the body. But if the soul, the half of the soul could not connect to the body, then of course the body wouldn't be able to sustain itself inside of the womb, and eventually the body would pass anyway. Now the way God's designed it is that's pretty much a physical impossibility. So what actually happens is every time there's conception occurring, there's a number of souls waiting, many millions of souls yet to incarnate, and billions actually. And they're all waiting around people having sex, waiting for an opportunity to incarnate. And so as soon as the conception process occurs, then they go through the process of incarnation, which is also the beginning of their own individualization. In other words, it's the beginning of them becoming self-aware. Till that point, they weren't self-aware, and after that point, they are aware. The thing that causes self-awareness is an instinctual process that God designed that every soul must incarnate in order to begin the process of awareness. So it's impossible to be aware without the incarnation process occurring. So now we have these bodies. We've got a spirit body, physical body, on both sides, two halves, and the half of the soul sort of... Now, of course, at the beginning of this, you know, in the womb, the first half is in the womb, so usually it's, there's things that cause one half to come first, and we won't get into that here, but there's reasons why one half comes first, and then the other half hangs around the first half, waiting also for an opportunity to someone in that vicinity to have sex as well, and then eventually the second half incarnates as well. And while the second half is waiting, it's still not self-aware. It hasn't begun the process yet of its own half becoming aware. So it's only when both halves actually incarnate and are now in bodies that they start becoming aware. Right? And for each of you, that's sort of like a very individual process. So the average person on earth starts thinking, I am the individual, I'm the singular unit. Right? Because at this stage, there is no awareness of the other half of self. So most people just believe themselves to be a single unit. And initially, most people just believe themselves to be a body rather than anything else. And it's only when you start having your intellect develop, and here I'm talking about the intellect of the soul itself, but also of the spirit body's mind. There's two intellects developing. The soul has an intellect, which is actually emotion. And the spirit body has an intellect, which is what you call your mind. Right? So there's two types of intellect developing. There's the emotions, they begin first. So the emotions start getting absorbed in the soul before the brain even is developed in any way. The emotions start getting absorbed from the surroundings, and in particular from the surroundings, including the parents. So emotions start getting absorbed from the parents. So if the parents are loving towards the newly conceived child and talk to the newly conceived child and express their affection to the newly conceived child, even though the child's not born yet, then of course the child feels all those emotions. And this assists the development of the brain, of the soul of the child. And remember, we're talking about half of the soul here. Right? Remember I said that the brain was the emotions. So the emotions of the soul, or the brain of the soul, is actually being developed before the intellect of the spirit body gets developed. That make sense to you? Yeah, and there'll be, in a minute, it'll become clear why I'm saying all these things. So here I am, I'm a newly conceived child, and I'm absorbing emotion, which is helping my soul, my half of the soul, to develop a sense of what's coming at it emotionally. Its experience is started emotionally first. And then, of course, this brain inside of the womb starts developing, and that's a later stage, that occurs at a later stage. Obviously, all the organs start forming over time. The brain is one of those organs that start forming over time, both in the physical body and in the spirit body. And as that brain develops, then, of course, the functionality of control of the body is actually developed in the physical body. The control of the physical form happens in the physical brain, and the control of the spirit body's form happens in the spirit body's brain. And the brain of the bodies is intended to control all of its physiological, nervous system, and all the other functionality of the bodies that are attached to the soul. And of course, there are thoughts that can be had. Now, the soul is capable of thought, and it passes thoughts to the spirit body's brain. And so after a while, what happens is the soul, having its thought, which remember is emotional, gets passed to the brain of the spirit body, which is then interpreted, and intellectual concepts start to be developed in the brain of the spirit body. And so what happens for most people is, because they're not very conscious of the emotions being developed in the soul, they already start to sort of focus more on the development of their mind and what's going on in their mind. Now, of course, that's because historically on Earth, many people have just been focused on developing their minds. So they wait for a child to become, where you can talk to the child or reason with the child oftentimes, and then they start talking to and reasoning with the child, not understanding that actually the brain, the spirit, the soul brain, the emotion, has already been working from the time of conception. Does that make sense? Now, of course, it's becoming more known now, isn't it, that feelings that are happening during pregnancy, inside of the, while the child's inside the mother's womb, it's becoming well known now that if you start educating the child now, then it gives the child a head start. But this is the reason why it does. The reason why it gives the child a head start is because the soul is actually being developed in the womb before the brain exists. Right? So any feelings don't pass via the brain. They're passing straight into the soul, and the soul then gets to experience those feelings without the constraints of the mind that would be placing upon those experiences. So if you give your child that experience while it's in the womb, it will have a great head start with regard to a lot of things. With regard to learning, with regard to absorbing, with regard to feeling its own self, its own emotions, and so forth. That make sense? Yeah, very powerful thing to do for your child. But most people are not aware of that, right? So they wait for the first 9 months to pass. But of course, the child's still absorbing things, but the average parent hasn't begun the process of education of the child yet, because it hasn't considered how much the child's actually absorbing. And during pregnancy, the child is absorbing the most, actually, for the most part, because once the mind starts being developed and they start listening to their parents, after a while, they start detuning from their emotions, which actually means that the learning process is now inhibited quite strongly. And so this is, any of you have been brought up by parents who have been mostly intellectual, you've already got a poor head start for your soul, right? And this is an unfortunate misunderstanding that we have on Earth, that you wait until the child's able to be developed intellectually, and that's when you teach your child, right? And that's not actually true. Okay, so here we have the soul. The half of the soul is connected to these two bodies, and these two bodies are developing over time. And the key then becomes, well, what are the main things that make up this soul? What over time becomes the constraining forces that are placed upon the soul? You can see firstly that the soul's brain is emotional, so any constraint placed on emotion is going to constrain the development of the soul's brain. You follow that? Right? Whereas any constraint placed on intellect generally is only going to affect the spirit body's mind, with the exception if the emotions agree with the constraint, then of course there's also constraint being placed upon the soul. Right? And unfortunately, the way most parents are is that when they have an intent intellectually to teach their child a certain manner, unfortunately, emotionally, that intent is also driven. So that generally means that if an intent is a poor intent towards the child during, these phases of its development, any time up until the child has a reasoning brain of its own, then the emotions are also being absorbed by the child at the same time as the intellectual intent is being absorbed. And so generally the constraint happens at both levels, the intellect as well as the soul, the emotion. Yep. All right, so here we are, we're in this soul, and now let's say we've now, our physical body has now grown to the point where you could say your brain is quite strongly developed. And by the way, your brain doesn't actually fully develop for a lot of your life on Earth. By the time you're around 23 years of age, a lot of your brain becomes quite established in its development. But a lot of people believe it's by the time you're 7, that it's more, there's very little change in your brain's size after 7, and that is true, but your development does not change because there's all sorts of triggered experiences that are going to happen after 7, such as puberty and things like that, which trigger further developments that occur within the brain, and also trigger further emotions in the development of the soul's brain. Right? So God designed a system where you're sort of, in a way, you're forced into some sort of development. Right? And this is a good thing, actually, because if you weren't, you could potentially remain a child your entire life, physically and emotionally, and that would be a terrible thing for you. Because a person who's truly wanting to act in harmony with their free will would want to become an adult at some point. Okay, so here we are. This is the general design. So is there any questions about that? And I don't want to answer too many, just clarification questions based on what I've just said, because I want to present some other details about some basic beliefs that we need to look at. Does that make sense? So we come to Samir here, and on this side we'll go across to Boris.
You were saying that the spirit body interprets emotions through intellect?
Well, the better course of thing to say is that the intellect of the spirit body is developing oftentimes independently to the development of the emotions in the soul, unfortunately. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's physically what ends up happening due to the constraints placed upon the child from its environment, and particularly from its parents. And so there is limitations placed upon the development of the child's emotions, the brain and the soul, as well as limitations placed upon the child's mind as a result of the brain and the soul becoming damaged. Yeah.
So when you say education begins at conception, emotionally educating the child, so
Yep.
it's the feelings of the parents projecting at the child in alignment with the truth? And
All
love?
feelings,
All feelings.
not just the ones in alignment with love and truth. So unfortunately.
Right.
And that makes sense, doesn't it? The child's open to all feelings at this stage. The soul is undeveloped. It can't tell what feelings necessarily are good or bad. And it's just going to absorb a lot of feelings. And unfortunately, during the gestation period, there's a lot of bad feelings coming around them. Sometimes there's mums and dads that are not really sure they really want to have a child, and then the dad might be upset because he's now feeling the child is competition to his wife's feelings towards him, and all of those things get projected at the child. And then you've got also the general belief systems of the parents, which are all stored emotionally in their souls, automatically being absorbed by the soul of the child. So there's quite a lot coming out of the child. This is why most children, when they're born, cry, because there's a lot to cry about. Yeah, there's a lot of absorption of emotions that are out of harmony with love coming to the child. Yeah. As well as obviously some that are in harmony with love.
Yeah, so to promote a healthy child, you would be humble and do your best to...
Yeah, the more you can deal with before you have a child, the better, the easier your child's going to find life. But also the more you can deal with in terms of your false beliefs, the better the child's going to find an openness to any belief that it can logically then assess. Until then, if both the parents are, say, Christian, let's say, and they have these emotional beliefs associated with Christianity, which include things like, you know, women are in subjection to men and other beliefs like that. So imagine the child is a girl, she's automatically now absorbing this belief. So by the time she's born, she's already got a part of the sin of the forefathers, the parents, in her, and she's already predisposed, unfortunately, to believing that belief, that men are, you know, the ones with power and are the ones who God appointed to be, you know, with the power, and that women should be in subjection. If the parents believe that, unfortunately, the child's going to start absorbing that.
And the effect of the generations, so ancestors who passed, with like the effect of that, and also...
only insofar as those effects are in the parents.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, you know, and whatever is in the parents is going to get passed to the child. Of course, there are also other influences. So some grandparents and great-grandparents have a tendency to want to influence this new child now, and many of them do project. They see the child developing in the womb, and they do start projecting their feelings at the child as well. Unfortunately, there's a lot of investment in family and so forth, and so they project their feelings towards the child even while it's in the womb, unfortunately. And if those feelings are unloving in any way or contain beliefs that are false, then unfortunately the child doesn't know that, and it starts absorbing that as well. Yeah. So both on earth and in the spirit world, there's a strong responsibility towards those who are already existing to not do this with the child, to allow the child some freedom of its own development. But unfortunately, most parents and most family lineages believe they own the child one way or the other. And so now they have a strong tendency to project these feelings at the child. And this is damaging the brain of the soul for the child. For that half, remember, this other half is often experiencing an almost completely different thing. So imagine, like in a heterosexual soul, quite often the female part of the child, so of this soul, is receiving these, let's say in southern USA, where there's a lot of Christian religious belief, and the female part of the soul will be absorbing this I'm in subjection to the male right from the time of her conception. The male half will be absorbing the opposite thing, obviously, which is women are in subjection to me and I'm better than a woman. And this is why many men, Christian men and men of other faiths who have these beliefs, believe that they own their women. They feel they can boss their women around. Many of you men actually in the audience still believe that, even though, because you've grown up in an environment that automatically taught you that, and that is stored in your feelings. You feel it. It's not something you might be intellectually aware of, but you feel it. And unfortunately, there's so many cultures on earth who do believe that men are superior to women. So unfortunately, you can see that by the time the child is born, if she's a girl, she's going to feel she is, unfortunately. And she's going to then potentially absorb beliefs that agree with the fact that she feels she's less. So she'll have a stronger tendency to believe in Christianity or the Muslim faith or the Hindu faith, where it talks about subjection, where the men, and it doesn't matter whether the faith teaches it more matters what the parents believe. So if inside of the family there is a tendency for the family to believe that the men are more important than the women, then, and this is present in a lot of cultures for religious reasons, but also for cultural reasons. And these beliefs are already entering the soul of the child before she's even got a developed intellect. She doesn't even know that that's even happening at this point, right? But it's a part of her experience already.
So then would prayer be a good way to assist?
Of course, but you remember your prayer has to be sincere for it to work. And unfortunately, as we've discussed in prior events, sincerity is going to be based upon what actual feelings you have about certain beliefs. So if you have a feeling in you as a male that women should be, in subjection to you, then unfortunately that belief is already going to be absorbed by your child, unfortunately. And if she's a girl, she will feel it like a reduction of her ability to express her free will. If it's a man, like a boy child, he's going to feel it as a superior emotion that he's allowed. So he's going to be born feeling he's superior, unfortunately.
So prayer more to yourself, for yourself to be exposed.
Yeah, so the important thing, as you can imagine, is really the more humble the parents are and the more desirous they are of changing their beliefs so they're more in harmony with God's, then the easier it is for the brain of the soul, the emotions in the child to develop. And therefore it's going to make it a lot easier for that child to absorb truths than otherwise it would be. Yeah. So on one hand, you can restrict the child's development quite severely, but on the other hand, the parents can actually do a lot of good things to enhance the child's ability to understand and so forth. So this is the exercise of will. You can do a really bad thing towards your children, or you can do a really good thing towards your children. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
We go at the back there on this side, and we come down to Michael on this side. We'll start with Michael actually because it's closer.
Thank you. Wondering about what the parents can do intentionally to provide protection for the child, and also thinking about the damage to the brain, the soul's brain.
Yeah.
Is this something that gets worked out on the natural love path, going to the sixth sphere, or only
To
through
a
the
degree.
redemption of divine love?
Yeah, in the growth, so two questions there, if you leave your mic with Mike. And two questions there. The second one, let's answer that first. So yes, if you are, now I've forgotten both questions.
Is it worked out on the natural love
Yes.
path, the damage to
That's
the
it.
soul?
Yes, so on the natural love path, a part of the process of the law is to correct any behaviour that's out of harmony with the law, which means out of harmony with truth. So if your soul's emotions have certain feelings towards others, and let's say in the example I just gave that the woman is feeling that she's less than a man, and the man's feeling that he's superior to the woman, then naturally the law of compensation will begin to work upon these false beliefs, and that will mean that you will have to feel feelings about those false beliefs, and eventually when you feel the feelings about the false beliefs, they will be released from you. And this happens on the natural love path. So by the time you hit the sixth sphere of the natural love path, you do believe women are equal to you, even though on earth you believe that wasn't true, right? So there is a corrective process. So God has designed, in fact, the majority of laws that God designed are all pertaining to his greatest creation, the human soul. And so there's a lot of laws that just have been created for the purpose of the human soul to correct its behaviour as well. So this is the law of correction. The law of compensation is a correction-based law to correct behaviour that's unloving so that the person is able to become happy even though they had a bad start. Right? So God already established all of these laws in order for a person to be able to correct their behaviour in the long run, whether they connect to God or not. Right? So that's the important thing. So by the time you're in a sixth sphere condition, you will be corrected as to the behaviour that you have absorbed from anything in the child during its developmental phases, as long as that stuff relates to people, to other people or the environment. But you won't be corrected from anything that relates to God. Beliefs about God, in other words. They often will remain. And the reason why God does that is to correct beliefs about God, you must choose to correct them. Right? Whereas the way God feels about your interactions with your brothers and sisters, of which everyone here is, and everyone in the world is, and everyone in the spirit world is, God feels like, no, there are certain things that I will not allow you to do. If you want to be happy, there's certain things that I will not allow you to do towards your brothers and sisters without there be some compensating or corrective law correcting that behaviour. So while you have free will, at the end of the day, everything is going to be corrected given a long enough time if you follow the natural love path to the point where you become a perfect human. So God designed that as a part of the changes that you'll need to make. Make sense, Michael? So on one hand, all the things related to humans and anything less than a human is all dealt with by the time you become a sixth spirit. But anything relating to God is probably not going to be dealt with. Right? You're probably going to retain beliefs that you even absorbed in your soul right from the time of your gestation. And you're probably going to retain those beliefs about God unless you choose to confront them, the reality of them, the truth of them. And that's an individual choice that each soul needs to make for itself. Is this?
Yeah.
Good question.
Protection for the child was the other question.
Well, yes, protection for the child. Now, obviously, the greatest protection you can offer the child is that your beliefs are true. And I'm not talking about your intellectual beliefs. I'm talking about your emotional beliefs that are all true. So even if you didn't believe in God yet, but you didn't have a formulated belief in God, as long as all of your other beliefs are actually true, you can see you're providing a lot of protection to the child. But as soon as you believe things that are false, the child is absorbing them. So this is a part of your personal responsibility as a parent, to make sure that you're believing things that are true. Like, try to find the truth, right? Because if you find the truth and you believe that truth in your heart, in your feelings, then of course the child will benefit from you having that truth. Now, it doesn't mean the child automatically accepts that truth herself or himself, but there is going to be a predisposition to accept it because there's nothing blocking it from accepting it. Right? So this is very good for the child. The child's not born with a developmental problem. All developmental problems actually begin in the soul. And so when the child's born with a developmental problem in its emotion, for example, it's often got a predisposition towards false beliefs, and that's a problem caused by the generations that have come before it. So the way to protect your child is to believe truth. And now that sort of places a lot of responsibility on the parent, doesn't it, to what is the truth? Well, I've got to sort out what the truth is for myself, And the more of the truth I can sort out for myself, the easier it's going to be on the child. Yeah. Makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
So it's kind of like a twofold, more like circumstantial, but when, per se, the father is absent during the gestational period, or in situations where maybe the paternal grandparents don't like the mother, or the maternal grandparents don't like the father, even if both parties are present, does that have an emotional effect on the child?
All of those things have an emotional effect. Of course, absentee parents or grandparents have less of an effect than those that are there.
Because they're not around.
Because they're not around, and therefore the child is absorbing less of their energy. The proximity of absorption usually begins with the closeness to the mother, while the child's in the womb.
So if the father is not present, but the mother is very angry about that or very grief-stricken about that, that will have a large impact on the gestating child's feelings about men and so on, more than the actual dad
not being there.
Not there.
Yeah. Him not being there has very little effect because generally the child can't feel him at this stage very much at all compared to the strong feelings that she feels from the people who are around her.
So, caveat, if the father is absent during the gestation period, and let's say he finds truth during that period or some form of it, right, a little bit, and then comes back, he's already missed out on the chance to influence that, like could he have given a disability, an emotional disability to the child Does the
Well,
soul?
you could say that firstly, the mum's attitude towards him not being there during that period is going to have a large effect. Him not being there has less of an effect, but when he does come back, frequently what he wants is a connection now, but there was none established during the gestation period. So now the child has less of a connection automatically with him because he wasn't there during the period where the child was absorbing all the emotions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
And this doesn't mean, this is immaterial as to whether they're married. It's just like whether they're around each other at the time. It's like, so, you know, it doesn't, obviously when you're married, you're probably living with the person, and if you're living with the person, there's a larger effect. But, you know, there's no, from God's perspective, if the parents of a child were around the child, both around the child as much as possible during the stays of gestation, and they had very positive feelings towards the child, and also had feelings harmonious with truth, even though the parents were not actually physically together sexually themselves, then of course there's less of an effect because there's more positive effect there. And so a lot depends about the circumstances. The other example you gave were grandparents not liking the father or grandparents not liking the mother. And well, it's the feelings of the mother and the father here that are going to have a large bearing. So if mother or father has not forgiven the grandparents, and they actually feel quite a lot of animosity towards those parents or feel a lot of anger towards those parents, then obviously the child's going to be absorbing these feelings without understanding what they're absorbing, of course. But they're going to, when they're born, they're going to have a, you know, this kind of thing does happen where a certain person picks them up and they just start crying. You know, that kind of thing will start happening where they recognise the person based upon the damage. And then because the person now with them intensely, it's sort of like by holding them, there has to be some crying. You know?
That explains a lot. Thank you.
And so, you know, you end up with things like mothers saying, why does my child cry all the time, even when I'm nursing the child? Well, it's got a lot to do with the feelings you had towards the child before the child arrived. And it's funny because a lot of people change their mind when the child arrives, or you could say change their feelings when the child arrives. So it's sort of like when they were first conceived, you know, when the child was first conceived, the parents are in an anxious state oftentimes. If it's the first child, generally there's anxiety, there's some fears. There's also like, is my husband going to stay with me, or is the man I had sex with going to stay with me? Is he going to look after the child with me? Is he going to care for me? There's all this anxiety in the mother, and there might be the similar types of anxiety in the father, like I don't know whether I want a child yet, whether I'm ready for the child yet, and all that kind of stuff. And so the child's absorbing all of these things, and then when let's say you're present at the birth, and all of a sudden you have this amazing experience where you go, wow, this is so amazing, and you sort of fall in love with the child at its birth, let's say. In other words, you come to love the child at its birth. The problem is, you've already had all those other feelings too, right, which the child has absorbed. So when you pick up the child thinking, I'm going to love this child, right, there's already all of its old history with you that it's feeling, and it bases everything on its feelings. It can feel the signature of the person picking it up and what that signature was and what it is emotionally. And so they recognise that instantly generally, and then they have a response. So a lot of times the child's going to be crying quite a lot in its first few years. And of course, a lot of times the parents are trying to shut the child up from crying as well, trying through different methods, which doesn't help the development of the child.
Thank you.
Yeah. We come across, to here first, down one, sorry. Down two, and we'll work our way back. Yep, sorry.
This is a question I had way earlier, but is the masculine half usually born first?
No. There's, as I said, there are certain factors involved. I won't go into all of them, but basically it's a lot to do with some laws that control what are instinctual personality traits within the two halves as to which half may come first. So sometimes the halves split in such a way that the instinctual personality trait of wanting to discover things is more in one than the other. And so oftentimes that one is born, conceived first. Also, there are environmental factors that determine which one's first. So on Earth at the moment, as I've already pointed out, there is a large amount of acceptance of males, the preference of males over females on Earth, in a lot of religious beliefs and cultural beliefs. And so that does then affect the fact that there are many males who are being born first now, or conceived first now, but historically it's not something that God designed to occur. It's because of the human, it's easier for a male to feel attracted to the birth process, to the conception process, than it is for a female to be.
Because socially or in society, it seems like the man is preferred to be older than.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of false beliefs about all of that, of course. Yeah.
A lot of that's relating to injury.
Yeah, all injuries. Yeah. Not by design. Straight behind.
Going back to the influence of emotions and
Yeah.
the child absorbing them, is it down to like proximity and time that you absorb more? Like, for example, are emotions that say the mother passes in utero, do they have a stronger influence on the child versus like a step-parent that comes in later?
Yeah,
Okay,
much larger.
Is there, we also need to say though that the early, like the gestation and then the early development of the child, things are very fluid. So for example, there might be, in the example Jesus gave before, where there might be animosity or anxiety projected at the child in the womb, but then when the child is born, the circumstance might change substantially. If that child is able to grieve and release the fears and grief that was sort of impressed upon them
During the period it was being sort of attacked, you could say,
yes,
emotionally.
In that loving environment, then obviously everything is, it's
automatically clearing away
it's cleared
beliefs.
away, and then the love has a big impact. But if things are shut down continually, then obviously the earlier things are precluding a new experience for the child.
Yeah.
so you could say it almost predisposes the child to more shutdown? If
It does, yeah.
Yeah,
Certainly
if,
does,
if
yeah.
there's never an environment which
Yeah.
encourages them to release that.
Yeah, so if you get a very strong cultural projection upon everybody in the culture that you shouldn't feel your emotions, then of course that cultural projection is going to have an effect on the next generation of children in that culture. Make sense? Yeah, very, very powerful these effects are. And this is why in the Paget message we said the sins of the forefathers are passed down to the child. And this is how they're passed down to the child. It's something that hardly anybody on earth even understands. Because they don't understand that the brain of the child is its feelings that started right at the time of conception. If they understood that one thing, they'd understand, wow, it's going to be powerful what we do to this child from that point of conception, you know. We need to sort ourselves out about a number of our bad feelings here. We need to correct all of that, you know, because if you understand the truth about, you know, the development of the child's brain, the soul brain, which is the emotional part of the child, you would want to correct that, wouldn't you, as rapidly as you possibly could. Yeah. Straight back behind you.
I'm glad that you just said that, because my question was, and I've always wondered this, is it moral to have a kid before you're perfect, or in the sixth year?
Well, it's a good question, and you know, it's a difficult question, isn't it? Because obviously if all of us decided that we weren't going to, then there'd be no next generation.
And I felt like it was kind of saying like, or yeah, just what you said.
Yeah, so physically, if all of us decided we can't have children and now until we've sorted out our sin, and none of us sorted out our sin while we were on earth, then the very next generation would never even be born, right? And if that is the case, then basically the human race on this planet would be gone. Unfortunately, souls in the state of where they're together yet to incarnate can incarnate on other planets. So they're not actually prevented from incarnating, because in the soul space you actually have the availability of many planets to incarnate to, not just... So if one failed for some reason, such as the Sun went supernova and everybody on this Earth died, for example, then that doesn't stop a whole heap of souls from incarnating, right? Because those souls can incarnate to any other planet that still remains. So God's put into place things which, you're right there, Michael, you want me to... God's put into place things in this regard to allow for everything to work seamlessly, even if something does go wrong. Yeah.
But can we say that there's a difference between condition and aspiration?
Which is where I'm going to go.
Yeah, but on that point, you want to talk about that in relation to that question? Because that's
Well, I want to talk about condition and aspiration as separate issues in a minute. Where I'm headed is so some of your questions I'm probably not going to answer right now because we're headed down a road that I want to take you down. So I'm more just asking now questions about this fact rather than what happens after this or anything like that.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, I was going to talk about the conception process of the will versus the aspiration in the parent.
Sure.
Whether or not they're perfect. Is that cool?
Yeah.
So, your question is really saying, like, well, is it moral to have a child when I'm not yet perfect? It's like a perfect natural person. But if you have the aspiration to become one, then that whole process of having children will be far less damaging to the child and also far more like rewarding to the parent.
Yeah.
So it's not so much about the condition of the parent, but the aspiration of the parent.
Yeah.
Because God has
You
designed...
could also say it's about the lack of humility of the parent.
Yes. If the parent desires to be humble in that process, God's designed it to be a growth process for both parent and child, a development process. I think it's very cool what God has done in the whole allowing humans to become parents, because if they have an aspiration for humility, love, truth and faith, even if they're not yet perfect, that whole process will accelerate their development, the parent's development in
towards
those qualities.
Perfection, yeah.
So it's the aspiration and the faith that kind of like...
Yeah, we'll talk about why that's the case in a minute.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
If we go next to you, Si, and then we'll over here if we can start down on this side. So, Debbie.
So I have a niece that has not cried after being born.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, could it be both ways, where their parents are perfect, that she doesn't have anything to cry about? Or?
No. It'll be
Very
total
suppressed.
Total suppression.
Very suppressed child.
Yep. No one on earth is perfect, so it's going to be to do with total suppression. Very damaging to the child. And frequently it can be caused not only by the parents but also spirits who've attempted to overcloak the child during the womb. And certain cultures are very susceptible to this because of their belief systems. So the Hindu culture, for example, is very susceptible to it, and the Buddhist culture, very susceptible to it. And the reason why is because those teachings cause parents to believe that these things are good. And so they then have already a feeling that it's okay if the child is automatically born with all these wonderful abilities, right? And not understanding that those wonderful abilities are not the child's, because the child's undeveloped. They're actually other spirits working through the child and overcoming the child's will. So frequently, by the time a child is born in some of these cultures, what happens is the child itself is so heavily suppressed and also overcloaked by another spirit who then acts like everything is fine and everything's calm and calms down the child from having any emotion at all. And this is very, very damaging to the child, because when the child passes, when it becomes an adult, it'll live its life like that, and then when it passes, that spirit will be disconnected. And once the spirit's disconnected, the child will become aware that it doesn't even hardly know anything yet of its own self. And it's a very damaging thing to do to a child. And many of these cultures look up to it, unfortunately. And so they think it's a good thing. And so that it's promoted as well. And it's been the case historically, not just the Hindu and Buddhist cultures, but also, in certain African cultures, it's been similar to that for many, many centuries, millennia. A lot of these cultures are very focused on spirit belief systems that are false and then they encourage those belief systems in the emotional development of the child while the child's in gestation. So while the child's in, while the mother's pregnant with the child, these belief systems are entering the child, and also there's no protection from spirits in a lot of these cultures. So spirits can actually, under those circumstances, overcloak the child in the womb, which is the very worst thing to have happen to the child, actually, because if you overcloak the child in the womb, you're also affecting its physical form development while in the womb. And this is what often does cause things like body deformities in the womb and things like that, because of the injuries of the great-parents or the great-grandparents who are overcloaking the child. So yeah, very damaging. And also, unfortunately, many cultures they can't actually see the soul of the child, of course, but they also can't see the spirit body of the child. And so they think the child is without a spirit body, and they think that through the process of reincarnation, they must take over the child's body. And the reason why they can't see the child's body is because the child's body is in a condition of love that is much higher than theirs, and so they can't see it. Does that make sense? And unfortunately, when they do that, there's all these very strong negative effects now on the development of the child. It's happening in the womb. And there's all sorts of things like sexual confusion that will happen, complete disconnection from any sexual development that's all predisposed inside of the womb. And there's all sorts of very bad things for the child's future that happen when these things occur. And they're all caused by false beliefs. A whole lot of them. And you can see why Mary and I are so passionate about this subject of false beliefs, because when you start to see the full effect of false beliefs on people on earth and in the spirit world, it's immense, like immense. A lot of what people think of normal life, we're not having a normal life as God designed it to be here. We're having a life that's severely influenced by these terrible false beliefs that are imposed, and they're imposed on the next generation of children every single time. And so they cause predisposition towards all sorts of things that are bad for the development of the child. Yeah. Thank you. So we're over here. Debbie? Yep.
So, I don't know, it's two questions, sort of, but my question's about genetics. Like, genetics?
Genetics, yes.
Are genes just like inherited injuries? Like, if there are families.
You mean genetic damage, or
genes? I mean, just like genetic problems, like a lot of the developmental problems are considered.
Yeah, so
genetic.
you're talking about genetic damage rather than genetics themselves.
And then, like in families, like there are families where you'll see there's a lot of ADHD, there's a lot of autism, and it's like.
Well, those kind of things are not. They're more spirit influence. That's not about genetics.
Developmental.
Yeah. So what is often classified as developmental problems are actually oftentimes the heavy spirit influence that are causing on the child and so forth, and also the lack of the emotional stateedness of the child's soul due to the parents and the lineage imposing that. When it comes to true genetic damage, so where the genes themselves have been influenced in such a way, so an example of that is like Down syndrome or something like that, where there is a true genetic damage rather than just a predisposition towards a certain developmental issue. When there's an actual genetic damage, well, yes, it's caused by the same problems I'm listing, which are the development of the child in the womb is controlled by a number of, quite a wide variety of factors, which are all to do with the emotions of the people around the child. And so these emotions can be so damaging that there's genetic damage that occurs to the genetic strings, the DNA of each cell. And if that occurs during that's already present in the parents, these genetic damages are already present in the parents due to the long lineage of problems, then those genetic problems will naturally be in the physical body and the spirit body of the child. Now, the spirit body is less influenced by those genetic problems than the physical body is. So fortunately, for most parties, well, in almost every case, you might have a genetic deformity in your physical body, and you may have that all your life, but by the time you pass, that genetic deformity is generally not in your spirit body, but the emotion that controls that deformity is still in your soul. And so that still needs to be addressed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And for many, there are processes in the spirit world, even for spirits on the natural love path, where they actually do healing of these deformities because they were deformities caused by the parents or the grandparents or the lineage.
Not this person.
Not the person's personal choice or their sin. And so there are, you could call them ceremonies, I suppose, that happen on the natural love path. These don't happen on the divine love path, but on the natural love path, there are sort of ceremonies that are engaged generally to assist the child or the adult now who's passed, who has these deformities, to release the deformities that were passed down to them and only retain the ones that they themselves have imbibed through their own sin. On the divine love path, then as you receive God's love, these things get cleared away naturally anyway. So you don't need these rituals, I suppose you would call them, or healing. You could call them healing circles or whatever you'd like to call them. You don't need them on the divine love path. When on the natural love path, they're frequently used, particularly in the lower spheres, to help clear away some of these problems.
I think we read about that in Through the Mist.
Yes, you did. In Through the Mist, Siamedes, I think it was a spirit who was responsible for the running of the ceremony, and I think he said there were 12 or 20 people he was working on at the time, and they all had these inherited problems which were all cleared away because of the love of the individuals wanting it too. It's a loving thing, of course, to do that. So they do that on the divine love path. Once the very first time you receive divine love, generally all those in the spirit state, generally all those things are cured instantly anyway.
Can I ask a question about sexual identity?
Perhaps we need to have, see, a lot of this now is getting down into deeper issues, and we need to sort of have a discussion about some fundamental things first. Does that make sense? So rather than continuing to answer these questions, because I understand all of you are fascinated, and it is a fascinating subject, isn't it? And you can start to see, can't you, the relationship between certain things happening with your children once you start understanding these things. It does help a lot. And I understand that many of you who do have children, you sort of go, oh, this has happened here and that. I understand all that. But we need to describe some further things that will help with the understanding of what's going on. All right? Okay. So fundamentally now, by the time this child is, let's say this child is now an adult, so both of these are now adults. So you've fundamentally got, haven't you? You've got one half who has had this experience where all the family lineage and all the parents and all the, it's absorbed emotions from all these people from the time of from its own conception onwards. And then the other party, because it's often these two experiences are completely, or appear to be, I should say, completely independent of each other, they're having a completely different set of experiences. Make sense? And they're both having these experiences concurrently. And also, unfortunately, there is this belief that gets established because of the parents and because of the parents' belief systems that they are individuals in their own right. In other words, there's sort of like a blockage now being established between the two halves. Right? And so the two halves can't feel each other very well because of these blockages. There's no, you could say from a metaphysical perspective, there's no energy passing between them, or you could say from a more emotional perspective, a soul perspective, there's no emotion passing between them. And as a result, it's like they are living completely independent, separate existences. Right? Even though they're not, they're one soul. They're still one soul. But because of their lack of consciousness about being one soul, they're really fundamentally living two half experiences. right? And as they develop sexually, they're going to start having a longing, not recognising the longing as for the other half of itself, but rather they'll recognise it a longing to sexually connect with somebody. And the sexual connection you then establish with somebody else other than your soulmate then causes this sort of breakdown between the two halves to even increase. Right? So in other words, by the time we're adults, and many people on earth now have had multiple sexual partners by the time they're adults, and each one of those has just added to or fueled the belief that they are an individual who just connects to other individuals. Right? But all the way through this, you could say a condition is growing inside of the soul. So let's call it a soul condition. And the soul condition, so on one half you've got a soul condition.
Now that, are you going to define what soul condition is?
I am, but you can say.
Just because we've jumped from what the child's absorbed to now the adult, but there's the engagement.
Well, all the way through its life it's absorbed.
And it's not just absorption that creates my soul condition, it's the engagement of my will.
Oh, we'll talk about
Yeah,
all that.
okay.
So, soul condition. So what is soul condition is the real question. Well, firstly, there's all the sensory experiences that the soul has experienced through its bodies. So there's sensory experiences that when you're awake on earth, you're absorbing senses from this physical body to your spirit body and to your soul, right? So remember there's a cord between the two, a silver cord, and all the sensory experiences from your physical body are being passed to your spirit body, and they're all also being passed to your soul. So you could say all the sensory experience that the child had is getting passed to the soul. So if it had the experience of being smacked when it was small, that sensory experience is being passed to the soul. If it had the feeling that it was, hair was combed when it was small, and it enjoyed the sensation, then that is getting passed to the soul, and so forth. All these sensory experiences, all the tastes that it has, and this is why a child, much to the consternation of the parents often, the child is like tasting everything.
It's a phase, isn't it?
So it picks up its own poo, tastes that. Oh, that is not very good. It picks up something like fruit or whatever. Oh, that tastes good. I'll have more of that, and so forth. And it's basically assessing taste, isn't it? During that process, and there's emotional experiences that is happening during its assessment. And these emotional experiences are also stored in the soul. So the emotions attached to the sensory experience are also stored in the soul. So it's impossible for anybody to be completely emotionless. You understand? Because the sensory experiences trigger emotion. And those emotions get stored along with the experience. So it's impossible to be like completely numb to everything. Right? So even a person who's called a sociopath on earth or something like that is still probably likes his food or his drink, or because he's had sensory experiences attached to emotion. So he might not like people, but he still has the experience of liking other things. Does that make sense? Yeah. So you got the emotion that's a part of it as well. Of course, the two in combination start generating beliefs about pain versus pleasure, don't they? Some events feel painful, some events feel pleasurable, some events feel like you don't want them anymore, some events feel like you'd like more of them, right? And so that starts happening where you start storing your memory of everything. And also what starts getting stored are, naturally, beliefs associated with these experiences. Right? They're all getting stored in your soul. Make sense?
Yeah.
And also, these things, because they are now in you, getting stored in you, and the more you don't feel certain things, the more they remain in you. So an example of that is let's say I had a sensory experience. I was learning to walk. I had a sensory experience that I got up to learn to walk, wobbled a bit, fell over on my face, like bang, on my head. Now that hurt, right? I was only, let's say, 1 year old or less maybe. I think I started to learn to walk when I was 9 months old. So bang, you know, that happens. So that happens. Now, if you're not allowed to process the emotion of that fully, there'll be an attachment of the unprocessed emotion to the experience. Do you understand? Now, interestingly enough, most parents allow their children, which is fortunate, we allow our children to have a cry when they fall over, generally, right? And in fact, many parents do allow that happen completely. Like, they might hold the child, but they're not trying to shut down the child from crying because they can see it hurt itself. And most parents in that place generally go, just cry all that out, that's all good, you know? And so the child doesn't join the stored emotion with the sensory experience. So the next day, it gets up and tries to walk again. But if it had have joined and could store that emotional experience, there'd be a memory of the experience that it was a bad experience. And now the child would be less inclined to try walking the next day. Does that make sense to you? Yeah? Because there's a joining of a painful emotion which was not allowed to fully pass through the soul. See, the intention of God creating emotions was that they would pass through you. Good or bad, they would all just pass through you. You wouldn't retain any of them. You would just have constant experiences. This is a part of the joy of life. You have one day you have this experience and the next day you have another experience, and they're often different experiences because there's different emotions attached. Now, of course, there's a lot of good emotion. So if they're all like pleasurable emotions, you could be having all sorts of pleasurable experiences, but each experience will be different to the other, right? So this is great, and it's just passing through you, it's not getting stored. But if you attempt to store one of them inside the soul, and that happens through the imposition of other emotions at the time you were experiencing the first one. So an example of that is, I'm crying, and my father is annoyed with me for crying. So now I'm absorbing two things. I'm absorbing the sensory experience of having some pain, which I wanted to cry about, but I can also feel my father, even as a 1-year-old, I can feel he's saying, oh, the child's crying, he's a bit of a wuss, you know, that kind of, feeling that already, you know, like feeling that, like, or even worse, that he's extremely angry with hearing the child crying, right, under those circumstances. Now the child's absorbing another set of emotions, which are also very intense, relating to the event. So now it's going to be associating the two sets of emotions with the sensory experience. One set that it's allowed to cry, maybe from its mum, the other set that's not allowed to cry, maybe from its dad. So now it's already developing a tendency towards crying when in the company of women, but not the crying when it's with men. Does that make sense? The belief is now getting established inside the soul due to the stored emotion. Right? So the problem is shutting down the emotion, and there's a number of ways we can shut down emotion. One is just by projecting unloving feelings at the child. You can shut down the child's emotional expression. The child is more prone to experiencing emotion when there's no unloving projection, but if there is unloving projection, the child associates the unloving projection with its experience at the moment, whatever is happening at the time. Right? So let's say the child went up to, quite often you see this in multicultural countries where the parents have some racism, the child doesn't. So the child goes up and starts associating with a child of a different race, but it receives a heap of projections from the parent about that. Right? So now the child is associating the colour of the person with the unloving projection of its parent. And that's now getting stored as emotion. inside of itself and has a belief inside of itself. Those people shouldn't be associated with. Those people can't, if the parent's feeling is they can't be trusted, then the child's starting to feel they can't be trusted. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of very damaging things that happen during this phase of development that are all getting stored as a part of the soul condition. So the thing I want you to remember is this soul condition is being developed over time through the experiences, and it's all getting stored as your memories. And the memories are not stored in your mind, they're stored in the emotions of your soul. The brain of your soul stores the memories. Make sense? It stores the memories as pictures, events, as well as smells, tastes, as well as emotional feelings and experiences, as well as pictures, as well as noise, as well as also all of the senses are participating in the storage of the events, and these all come together to form the condition. Now, the more loving the experience, the more loving the condition will be. But the more difficult the experience, the more unloving the experience, the more unloving the condition will be internally, inside of the child, inside of the soul. Of course, this child also, on top of that, starts making its own decisions. And usually that starts occurring quite young. It's, you know, most of you know of the terrible twos, right? You've heard of that experience, that expression, which for most parents it's terrible because the child's now acting independently of the parent to the parent's consternation. Like the parent wants the child to do what the parent wants, and the child's got a will of its own, trying to develop its own will. And during that phase, particularly it begins when it's very young, when it can't reason very much, it's expressing its will emotionally. And you try controlling that, it's like pretty hard. And so that's when a lot of parents put more control on the child. This is when often the child starts to get spanked, for example, because of its behaviour. Or there's a lot of withdrawal of love from the child. Often the child is locked up or put away or put in a room, or lots of other things happen to the child during this phase of development frequently because of the parents trying to control the will of the child. And the more successful the parents were controlling the will of the child, the less developed the will of the child will become. So now we've also got a part of the soul condition is how the child is now allowed to express its will. Make sense? The child's only allowed to express its will in certain directions. When it expresses its will in that direction, the parent agrees with its behaviour, and therefore the child feels the environment is loving. And then on the other hand, the child's, when it expresses its will in a direction that the parent feels is wrong, and by the way, this is not measured by God's truth about whether it's right or wrong, but just by the parent's feelings, then the child joins the parent's feelings with its own development of its own will. Make sense? Very damaging to do this, of course, to the child, but this is a part now of the soul condition of the half of the child. So we're talking about the feminine half here in our examples. So now she's absorbed these different things all the way through, but also now her will is being manipulated by the feelings coming from the environment. And so in the Paget messages, when you read about soul condition, we're referring to a lot of things there. Does that make sense? So when you hear the word soul condition, when you look at what is their soul condition is quite a complex thing, isn't it? Because there's all these experiences and emotions and sensory feelings and beliefs and the memory of them all, and even to the point where the current state of the will of the individual has been set by these experiences. So then the question becomes, how do I get out of them if they're unloving? Because if that's all you ever were, can you see that would be a bad start and there'd be no correction? It'd be terrible. if that was all you ever were. So if you are only your soul condition, it would be a terrible thing, because now your soul condition, which is largely being determined by all sorts of events, some of which you had no control over whatsoever, if you couldn't change it, it would be such a terrible start, and there's no way to correct it. Right? So fortunately, there's other parts of your soul. Because if it wasn't for the other parts of your soul, where our life would be functionally damaged, usually by the time we're born. So what's the other parts of our soul? The other part of our soul is our soul aspiration. Fundamentally, you could think of it as the faith you have. What you believe is good for your future. And it's about determining, it determines the direction of your future choices. And they can frequently be completely different to the current state you're in. An example of that is, let's say by this stage, because of the different situations that have occurred and my own choices, I've got to the point where I'm a drunkard. And I'm an alcoholic. Because I'm trying to get away from my feelings. There's so many hard feelings that I want to get away from. And I have some beliefs that I'm allowed to get away from my feelings. It's a good thing to get away from my feelings. Everybody in society is telling me it's a good thing to get away from my feelings. And I've learned that drinking alcohol helps me get away from my feelings. So I'm focused, I've become what's called an alcoholic. And it's not a disease, by the way. It's a condition generated by a whole set of beliefs and will and emotion and sensory things that occurred over the course of our life that causes us to finish up there, right? And see, the average alcoholic believes, well, I'm an alcoholic for the rest of my existence. And not true. If that was true, it'd be very unloving. The so-called higher power, which is in the concept of Alcoholics Anonymous, wouldn't be a very high power if all he created was, you know, you having a predisposition towards a thing that you could never get rid of. That's not a very high power. Like, a high power would be somebody who created a system of things where whatever you had, you could get rid of. Right? That's a high power. So here we are on the soul aspiration side of things. What controls my aspiration? Well, obviously, you can see to some extent your condition may control your aspiration. So in other words, I've become an alcoholic. My belief is that I should be able to avoid my emotions, my painful emotions, my painful experience should be able to be avoided by me taking an action of drinking all the time. And I've found that it works. I get to avoid a lot of my feelings by me drinking all the time, right? And so I start to think that's really good. So you could say at this point, my soul aspiration is faith that drinking is good. It's helping me. That's my soul aspiration. Does that make sense? It's a belief for your future because it drives your current actions into your future. This basically says, so when I'm sober, I want to be drunk. Because the belief is when I'm drunk, I'm able to deal with my feelings better. Well, I'm not dealing with my feelings at all, but my belief is that I'm coping with life better, right? This is why I feel attracted to it. So you can see that the soul condition can determine, firstly, some soul aspiration, can't it? You can see if I've got the belief, I avoid my feelings, and then drinking a lot has helped me avoid my feelings, then naturally my aspiration is going to be to drink more so that I can avoid my feelings more, right? However, over time what will happen is this. I will recognise, as the person getting drunk all the time, that it's destroying my life one way or the other. Over time I'll start seeing my relationships decay. My children hate me. Everybody thinks I'm a selfish person who just wants to have alcohol and that's it. And so they don't want to associate with me anymore. So I finish up losing a lot of my friends. Right? There's a growing pain, which is a feedback system to my current condition saying, there's something wrong with your current system while you continue to do this thing, because you look at the results and you go, there's got to be something wrong. The results are proving there's something wrong. So can you see one of the things that change me is my belief that grows that something is wrong. In other words, that it's false. It's an illusion. It's not working. So this drinking thing, while it seems to feel good on one side, there's a lot of bad things that it creates which all feel bad on the other side. Now, the average drinker will just drink more, even with all those bad things, until he realises that the more he does it, the more bad things happen to him. He gets put in jail for his drinking. You know, he's harmed people, and then they all attack him with his drink, for his drinking. And he does more and more things that eventually become so painful that there's a smidge of a development of awareness in him that says, I need to stop. This is not working. Does that make sense? This is not working for me. There's something wrong with what I'm doing here. Now, of course, at this point, because he's uneducated, he doesn't know that his beliefs about his emotions are the main cause. And in fact, most alcoholics are never taught that on earth, right? But if he was taught the truth, he would be able to see that quite clearly, right? But even though he doesn't know that truth, already there's now an aspiration changing in him to not drink. Can you see that? He's now having feelings that perhaps he shouldn't be drinking. And then he hears of things like Alcoholics Anonymous, which help people to not drink. So he thinks, I'll go there. They might be able to help me to not drink. Go there, tell my story. In the process of telling his story, he often will have some feelings. Some of those feelings might be connected to some of the emotions. This is why he drinks. And in the process of having that, he starts releasing some feelings. And sometimes those feelings mean that he's less inclined to drink. But he's not releasing his beliefs, because he doesn't know that his belief is the main problem. His belief is that he should be able to get away from his bad feelings by taking a substance. That's his belief. He should be able to get away from bad feelings. So even though he's feeling emotions and telling his story, releasing some emotions, he still is not attacking the problem of his belief. Right? So this is why alcoholics generally feel that it's a disease, because the belief remains. And while the belief remains, so too will the inclination towards the behaviour. Or you could say the inclination towards the sinful act. The result of the sin. The belief is the sin, and the result of the sin is the sinful act. But he does have a soul aspiration developing that's saying stop. You were going to say?
I was just going to say back on your point about the inclination towards the behaviour. Actually, we could say, if we zoom out, this is one of the reasons why most people on earth don't believe that change is actually possible on any issue, for that exact same dynamic.
For the same reason.
Yeah.
So a lot of people believe their behaviour is a part of their personality. Not true. Right? But a lot of people believe that because they don't assess their beliefs and how their beliefs are guiding their behaviour. Right? But let's look at this soul aspiration. You can see that it can grow over time to be completely opposite to the condition. So an example of the drunkard that I've just given, the alcoholic, he had a condition where he believes himself to be an alcoholic, but he also has an aspiration developing that he's got to stop drinking. So his aspiration is completely different to what his condition is now demanding. Can you see that? Now that the aspiration is different, he will move in the direction of his aspiration. Now that might happen over time, slowly, depending on the intensity of the aspiration. So initially the aspiration when a person goes to, say, Alcoholics Anonymous or something, it might be quite small, and you know, 5 days later they have 5-day chips, and then by the 6th day it's all, you know, they're drunk again, you know. Because the aspiration is quite small, but as time develops and there's another disaster occurs and another disaster occurs, the aspiration is starting to become quite large. Unfortunately, he still doesn't understand the power of his beliefs upon his behaviour, right? But at least he does know that he's got to change it. And the way he's changing it is by changing his aspiration. So instead of having a longing to drink, he now develops a longing to abstain. That makes sense? Now that he has this longing to abstain, even though his beliefs are saying, don't abstain, you know, the aspiration is greater than even his own beliefs, because he abstains. And a lot of times people have abstained for 20 years, 30 years, right? Because their aspiration has become greater than the belief that they can avoid their emotion through drinking is. Unfortunately, it's still pretty hard though, because the belief still exists. And while the belief exists, there will be still an inclination. So let's say a really traumatic event occurs, such as death of the partner. You'll get to the point where a traumatic belief is so great, the trauma is so great, that the emotion, the belief triggers, I don't want to feel that emotion, so the belief kicks in and says, I need to drink. Bang, I'm not drinking again. Overnight. Even after not drinking for 20 years. And that's why they call it a disease. Because the belief has not changed. The belief substantially is the same, that I can use a substance to get over bad feelings. Right? And because in that situation, the belief about death is such, like, so final, the average person goes, well now, like, up to now what I believed was I'd benefit by not drinking. But now that I've got this terrible pain of losing my loved one, my wife, let's say, or my partner that I've had for 20 years now because I've been sober the whole time, and I've lost her, now the belief inside of me is now, because the belief is still there, it's saying there are some things that are just so bad that you're never going to be really able to feel them. And so one of those things is the death of someone you love. So that belief triggers this other belief that I should be able to avoid that very, very, very painful emotion using the same method that I used before. Alcohol. And overnight, he's drinking again. Right? And sometimes he'll drink now for years after that, until he realises, actually, I can feel the pain of the loss of my partner, right? And that pain is a lot less than drinking and myself silly for the next 20 years. And then he'll stop. But unfortunately, he still has not dealt with the belief. So often the death of a child is worse than the death of a partner for people. And they feel, a lot of people on earth feel that the death of the child is the very worst thing you could ever experience. So let's say he's had children through this relationship, and one of them dies. Now he's going to revert back to his belief again. That is that bad that I cannot do it. And let's say not only does his child die, but he feels he's to blame for his child dying, which would even be worse, wouldn't it? Like, now it's like something he just doesn't want to deal with at all, emotionally at all. So now he's going to revert back to the belief. I can avoid this emotion using a substance, and away it goes again. That make sense? The aspiration, can I just say a few things about aspiration, what it actually is? You could say that it's a belief about your future, so it's faith, right? Which is a belief that something is obtainable in your future. So you could also call it a future belief, couldn't you? Well, it's not the right way to say it. What's the right way to say that? a future likelihood,
Yeah.
shall we call it? Not just a possibility. If it's just a possibility, it's probably not strong enough. But a future likelihood, something that you feel quite certain will occur in your future. Yeah. So this future likelihood, this faith, this aspiration is a good word for it. In the Paget messages, you will see we use that word all the time. All the time. Soul aspiration. Aspiration. If you have an aspiration, you will change. Aspiration. Longing. Aspirations trigger longings. You will change. And so you could also call it, couldn't you? Passion towards a direction. Or you could call it a desire for a specific direction that you don't currently have. That's different than a desire that's driven by your memories. So an example of a desire driven by memory is that I've eaten, I like a lot of fruit, so I've eaten mangoes before. There are certain type of mangoes that are the best mangoes, right? So when I've got a choice of all the different types of mangoes, my memory is telling me that one there is the best one, right? And so I'll go to that. Now, even if there's a brand new type out that I've never tried, I'll be very strongly tempted to just go to the one I already tried, right? And so that you can say I've got a desire for that type of mango, right? And Mary knows me well enough to know that's what I do. So,
I'm laughing because I'm always like, why don't we try that?
well, let me try that one. And I go, is it ever going to be? And then we try it, and I go, yeah, it fell down. I want to go back to the other one. And so, that being said, I do like trying new mangoes because I always sort of feel that mango's pretty tasty, right, for the most part. Mind you, there are some pretty bad mangoes. Really grainy, stringy things, and not very sweet, so there are bad ones and there are good ones. And some also have a sort of a funny taste, like they're half rotting even though they're ripe and stuff like that. There's all sorts, isn't there?
Turpentine.
Yeah, so turpentine, that's a more chemical problem.
Have you tried Indian mangoes?
Oh, I've tried all sorts of mangoes.
We're segueing into mangoes now.
Yeah, don't you say mangoes. I'm giving you an example of how your memory and your prior emotional experience is driving a desire. But that's not the same as the type of desire we're talking about here. This is a desire for something you've never done before. Does that make sense to you?
Or you've never had,
it before, that experience before. Right, so this is about desires that you've not currently experienced or had a memory of having, but now you want to have one. Right? And you can understand the importance of this because when it comes to your relationship with God, you start out by not having one. And at some point, if you're going to have one, you're going to have to develop a desire, a faith, that a soul aspiration, that a future position is possible to you. A relationship with God is possible. Now, partly education can help you. So when it comes to aspiration, there are things that support aspiration. You could say truth is a thing that supports aspiration, couldn't you? So an example of the man who's the drunkard, the truth, facing up to the truth that his life is a mess because of the alcohol abuse, and that he could get his life to not be a mess just if he left that one substance alone. That's a truth that he's come to face. Once he faces that truth, he can develop some aspiration. So you can see the truth supports an aspiration. This is why education is very important, because when you get educated about things you don't know about, you can then accept some truths that you didn't accept before, and those truths can start developing aspirations for you. They trigger the creation of aspirations. Another part of developing an aspiration is humility. You can see in the case of the humility. You can see in the case of the drunkard, he's got to be humble enough to assess the pain of his current situation, and he's also got to be humble enough to see that he could change it. Doesn't he? He's got to have sort of two sets of humility. One, relating to his current situation and one relating to the future, that it's possible to change it, right? And he's got to be humble enough to accept his current situation emotionally. He's got to go, yeah, I'm in a mess. It's a terrible mess I'm in. If I didn't have this substance, I wouldn't be in such a mess. This helps his humility to the truth of the matter will help him see and face the fact. Another part of things that drive aspiration is love, the desire to love. In the case of the alcoholic, he's sick and tired of hurting people, other people. He realises, I've hurt my children, I've hurt my parents, I've hurt my wife, I've hurt every relationship I've ever had. I've lost my jobs, you know, they were good jobs and I've lost them too, and I've hardly got any money because I just spent it all on alcohol. It's all, the whole lot is a mess, right? So his desire to get to love somebody, can you see? Love his children, love his wife, love people, you know, even the future people he meets, causes the aspiration to build. But also his desire to love himself, can you see, also causes the aspiration to change. Because if I love myself, I wouldn't go, I'm not going to harm myself every day, all my life. If I cared about myself in any way, I wouldn't choose to do that. So after a while, his love for his self is greater than his love of avoiding the feelings. And that causes an aspiration to change. So there's a balancing, a priority, an internal priority system going on where now the things that I put priority on before, which were destructive, they are down here now instead of up here. And my building aspiration, because I want to love people, I want to face the truth, I want to be humble about it, my building aspiration is now higher than my aspiration to sin. Now I'll stop. Can you see? I'll only stop sinning when my aspiration to no longer have the effects of it is greater than my aspiration to have the sin itself. Yeah? Then I'm changed. I'm going to change because of that. So change is possible, but only when the soul aspiration develops to the extent that it's greater than the desire to remain in harmony with your condition. So in other words, what you want for your future is more important to you than living your current life. Well, that's another way of saying it, isn't it?
Yep.
So what you want for your future is more important than just holding on to what you currently have. Right? In other words, your soul aspiration is more important to you than your condition is. It's another way of saying that. When your aspiration is greater than your condition and more important to you than your condition, you could say, as a priority, internal priority system, the aspiration must be greater than your desire to remain in your current condition. If that is true, you will change no matter what happened to you, no matter what start you had, no matter what memories you have, what beliefs you have. All of that doesn't really matter anymore. Doesn't even matter what your will is currently even set to do, because your aspiration is changing it. Your aspiration is now affecting your will and causing you to make a different choice, even though your current soul condition is saying, go and do that thing. Your future aspiration is saying, no, that's not good. Do this thing instead. Right? Now, obviously, at the beginning of this, it's quite difficult, right? Because the soul condition is going to scream at you, I want what I want. And if the soul aspiration is not strong enough to overcome that condition, then you'll still do what you think you want. But if I measure the pain by facing the truth, I'm humble to the truth about what's going on, and I desire to love more than I currently do, then what will happen is this aspiration will build, and now change becomes possible in the direction you want it to occur. So, can I also say, and this is something to bear in mind, that change may be towards a downward trend as much as it could be towards a upward trend.
Cool.
Why'd you have to go into
Well, it can be, can't it? I could be in a certain condition right now that says, you know, I'm happy to be like in a sexual relationship with just one person. But some person comes along and convinces me that having a threesome is a lot better thing, right? And I think upon it, and I ponder upon it, and I feel about it, and I go, maybe that's true. And I wonder about it, and I reason with myself about it. Eventually, the reasoning and the wondering, if I don't see the full pain that such a thing creates before I engage the action, then it's likely I'll engage the action. You understand? So I'm developing an aspiration to do something that I don't realise is going to have some negative consequences. Because the people around me are telling me it's great, it's fantastic, it's all good, it hasn't had any negative consequences for us because they're all insensitive to their feelings and they're all insensitive to their beliefs and insensitive to their will, insensitive to love. So they all think it doesn't have any problem, but of course it is having problems for them too. But then when I try it, I destroy my marriage. Bang. Like all sorts of different things start happening between the couple. And then I realised, gee, you know, like I thought that would work out well, but it isn't working out well, right? So that now causes a correction. Can you see? It's good if you can measure the future potential results before you engage the behaviour, isn't it? It's like the drunkard who was not a drunkard when he was probably 12. He might have, you know, be later, but he wasn't when he was 12. Didn't have a desire to drink all the time, right? Can you see that if he was taught how to deal with his hard emotions and he was taught how to deal with that and cope with his emotions without needing substances, and he was taught and also came to believe that using substances is bad for him emotionally because it suppresses his feelings, and he was taught all that, and he believed it, he'd have to believe that. Can you see when he was offered alcohol to get out of his first major problem, he would go, I don't even feel the desire to do that, you know, I just want to deal with my problem, like feel my problem, right? So he wouldn't even been attracted to it in that place, to do that thing. So attractions that create aspiration are presented to you from everywhere. People, spirits, you know, occurrences on earth, and particularly there's a lot of things that are happening on earth right now where the person sort of believes that looks good to me. Shiny, you know, attractive to me. It looks good to me if I do that thing. So, you know, many of you ladies are faced with this whole thing about, you know, fixing yourself with plastic surgery.
Can we not call it fixing? Yeah, can we call it?
Well, no,
we've solved that, aren't we?
The belief is that you are fixing yourself with plastic surgery, right? And that develops because everybody looks better you know, initially maybe, many of them do, initially. But then you examine the ones 20 years later, what do you see? So, oh, God, it's terrible. And you start, but imagine you're the very first person doing plastic surgery and you don't have anybody to look at 20 years later to examine. And imagine also inside of you, you feel bad about yourself and you feel bad about your appearance.
Well, your belief is I'm aging, therefore as a woman my value is decreasing.
My value is going down,
That's
my
what
sexual
society
value
has taught us. That our value is sexual, and if it's decreasing, well then we are less valuable.
So now I'm going to be very attracted, I'm going to develop an aspiration to be very attracted to the thing that's going to harm me. Does that make sense? So aspiration works in a positive manner as well as a negative one. So it's very, very important, if you want to understand the soul, it is very important for you to understand how aspirations develop. You see that? Because aspirations are your method of change. They're the way in which you're going to be able to change. Right? And many of us don't understand how these aspirations develop, and this is part of our problem. Okay? So, Heather.
So the deep-seated beliefs that we have from conception can change through our soul aspiration.
Correct.
That's what you're saying?
Yes,
Correct.
that's why it's so exciting, isn't it? Because like nothing is static.
None of you are going to remain the person you are now.
Have you taught in the past that we can get rid of our beliefs by changing or by feeling our emotions? Like, is this kind of a different way of changing our beliefs?
It's not just feeling your emotions, is it? Because remember, your emotions are attached to beliefs. So you've got to work through beliefs in order to change. Remember, I gave the example just earlier that the alcoholic, if his major belief is to avoid his emotions, even though his aspiration is strong to not drink, his emotions, whenever the emotions are triggered in such a way that he feels them intensely, he'll be tempted to drink because his belief hasn't changed. Right? Now, I have said all this before in different ways. You know, in the whole 2019 assistance group, I think
Which is not public, but yeah.
which is not public, we talk about this. And in fact, one of the things we want to do with in our next trip around is to actually go through some of that material in a 3-day session with people, like, as part of our next trip, because it's so important to understand. Yeah?
Heather, can we say that, or we need to say that you can't change a belief without humility, without feeling emotion.
Or without the desire to love, or the desire for truth.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. The feeling emotion in itself is not enough.
Right.
You must have these other aspirations in order for your belief to change.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you will feel, but you will be reinforcing the belief through
Over
the
and over.
feeling.
This is what many of you are doing. You think that I've said in the past, which I, by the way, haven't said. You think that by feeling your emotions, you're going to clear away all of your unloving behaviour. Not true. You've got to feel your false beliefs to clear away your unloving behaviour.
Which are
emotional.
Yeah.
Right. Now, perhaps I can give an example of that. Perhaps might help.
Yeah.
So let's say I have a false belief. So we might just leave this here, and I'll just rotate the board. So let's say I have a belief that that got established during childhood and my adult life, that I've got to protect myself from love. Right? Well, why would I have that, do you think? Any idea why you might have that? There's all sorts of things that might have happened, mightn't there?
I'm drawing a blank, but that is a big one for me.
Yeah, it's funny how it's blank though. Yeah, this is a big problem for many people, right? They protect themselves from love. So in other words, they feel that love is dangerous. So the false belief is that love is dangerous.
Love will take something from me. That's what I'm coming up with.
Yeah, that's right. Love hurts. So you're a Roy Orbison fan, basically. The song, you know that song, Love Hurts. There's so many songs about love hurting, isn't there? If you think about it. So a lot of people have the false belief, and those songs, almost every one of them went like #1. Interestingly enough, which is indicating that many people feel quite strongly that that belief is actually true, even though it's a false belief. So that's a false belief. Love hurts is a false belief. Yep. But my emotions, recording my sensory experiences and my past and all the things that happened, are saying, no, love hurts, love hurts, love hurts, love hurts. And I'm reinforcing that to myself constantly. Right? So that's me. I've stored this belief and it's in me, love hurts. What do I do? The average person says to themselves, that is true. So the average person is saying, that false belief, which is from God's perspective and also from love's perspective, is actually a false belief. They believe that that is true, that it's not a false belief, that it is a true belief, that love does hurt, you know?
And that protection keeps me safe from hurt. Yeah, but protecting myself from love keeps me safe from hurt.
Keeps me safe from hurt, right? So that's what they believe. So in that state, can you see, you're gonna probably not open yourself to people very much. You're gonna hide yourself a lot. Whenever love is offered to you, you're gonna go, oh, you'd be suspicious about it.
You just let a little bit.
You let a little bit in, but it's under control because you're always aware that at some point in the future it might hurt you. So you're sort of, I'm not going to give my whole heart to this. I'm just going to just give a little bit to this, and we'll just see where that goes. And then you might 10 years later give a little bit more to it, but 20 years later the guy leaves you, and then you go, see, love hurts.
And then, yeah.
So you get reinforced, love hurts again.
So then if we talk about feeling emotions, which is where the question started.
What emotion am I going to feel?
What will I feel when my husband leaves me, for example?
I was right.
Yeah, and if I'm crying, what would I be crying about?
Love hurts.
That is the...
Yes, love did this to me.
Love
This is
did
the
this to
result
me.
of love. I'm in so much pain about love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you see you could stay in that emotion of crying about love hurting you for the next year? Couldn't you? And substantially nothing will change, except, in fact, it'll be changing in the wrong direction because you'll be more fixed, committed to the idea that love hurts, and therefore more committed to the idea that you have to protect yourself from it. This is why many people, by the time they hit their 40s or 50s, are living alone. Because they've had all these different experiences during their formative years and later that have reinforced to them they believe that love hurts, and it's become a belief, and it doesn't matter how much you cry about it, you're still going to think it. So you can process your emotion every day about that for the rest of your life, and you'll still believe that it is true.
The only thing that might change is similar to the alcoholic, where you go, this is really painful now.
I'm getting lonely. Nobody understands me or gets me. I don't have any real relationships anymore.
I'm miserable all the
I don't
time.
have many close friendships. Nobody really, I can't even talk about what's in my heart to anybody anymore. And you start measuring the pain of it all. And you go, yeah, it's painful, but if the pain is not as great as what you feel the love hurt, you're still not going to change. Right? You're still going to think, no, I'm right, love does hurt, I'm not going to do it. And you can be offered love in that state from a person who absolutely loves you and is never going to hurt you, and you won't even accept it. You will reject it for sure. Because your belief is, I've got to protect myself from it.
So one has to bottom up. Sorry. Oh.
And so we have to have an aspiration in our soul to feel how much it hurts that we think love hurts.
Well, what's going to change is, see, love is a big thing, isn't it? So when a lot of times most people don't realise that if you have false beliefs about love, they are your worst false beliefs. You understand? Because they are big things that, see, a lot of people feel love brings happiness, but they also feel that love brings the very worst pain you could ever experience. Right? So if you have these false beliefs, can you see it's going to have to be something massive that's going to change your mind, probably, right? Or you're going to have to somehow disconnect the belief somehow from the emotions you have, aren't you? Somehow.
Like maybe by feeling God's love. That would be pretty massive.
Well, that's probably not going to happen because you think love hurts. So if you think love hurts, then God's love's going to hurt. So why would you ask God for love under those circumstances? You're probably not going to. And you're certainly not going to sincerely do it because you believe love hurts and you sort of believe, well, God's going to hurt me too. The belief assumes that all love hurts. So therefore, it's all going to be bad. right? So thinking about the principle from the board, the flip side of what we just taught, something's going to, so this is, you could say this is now my, what do we call it? Soul condition. Okay. And we've also said that change can only occur when my
Soul aspiration. Is greater than condition.
Is greater than my condition. And we said that the things that change my aspiration are
Passion.
desire.
That is my aspiration.
That is my aspiration. What changes it? We said on the previous board.
Faith in the future.
Faith.
Of
But that
possibilities.
is soul aspiration. Truth
Yes.
changes it.
Humility.
Humility changes
Love.
it. My desire for love changes it.
And
Yeah.
desire.
Right, so these things change it. They change my faith. So faith is my soul aspiration, and these things change my faith. Okay, you follow so far? Okay, so here I am. I'm in this state where I believe my condition is such that I believe love hurts. I have to firstly get to the stage where I have an aspiration to believe something different to that, don't I? Yeah. Now, these things should give me an aspiration to believe something different, right? And particularly truth. You always focus on truth first. Truth sets you free, right? So you've heard me say that, and it's all written in the Bible, what I said in the first, and I've said this for 2,000 years, truth sets you free. So what's going to free me from my condition is facing the truth so that my aspiration can change so that a new condition is possible. Right? This is how your soul works. Your soul is not going to make adjustments just intellectually. You're going to have to accept some emotional truths. Remember, none of this is intellectual. You're not going to be able to go, oh, well, I really like a relationship now. I'm a bit lonely, and I feel a bit sad about not having anybody who loves me or who I can love. And so,
I'll just love.
I'll just love.
I'll give it a try.
I'll receive love.
Oh no! So people go, I'm just going to become loving now. I'll do some neuro-linguistic programming on myself, and I'll just become a loving person. And everything, I'll just talk about love all the time, and I will just become love. I will make this beautiful translation into becoming love, and then I will be love.
And then I will beat everyone with the knowledge that I am love. It's really
you can see you're just creating another fake world, really, right? Completely self-delusional. Because unless you understand how the soul works, and unless you're willing to change the basic fundamentals that are driving how it works, substantially nothing's really going to change, right? So the average person that's doing all this with their mind is just entering a place of even more delusion and denial than they were in before, right? So we've met many people that say, oh, I am now love, I be love everywhere. We had one actually say that in our group in Canada, actually, while she was actually attacking me at the time. So she wasn't love, but she believed she was love, And this is the delusions we enter because we don't want to understand how the soul works, and we don't want to actually change something substantively. We want to have some magical thing that means we don't understand how the soul works. We want to be able to make a change without understanding how our soul works. And a lot of times when we're taking things to God, we fundamentally want to make a change without understanding how our soul works. Right? And God's saying, but I want you to understand how your soul works, because if you understand how your soul works, you understand the amazing thing I created, you. You'll understand yourself. And we're going, oh, but I don't want to understand how the soul works, so I just want a magical solution to my problem. And if a magical solution is not actually possible, then let's fabricate one, like with my delusion. Let's do that instead. And there's a lot of this in New Age philosophy, fabricating delusions in order to avoid reality. That's why New Age philosophy is so damaging to people, because it is fabricating delusions to avoid reality. The reality is, unless I face some truth, and I'm humble, and I measure the results of my current place, I won't develop any faith to change it. Unless I educate myself with some truth, I will not develop anything to change it. Truth about love. So one truth about love is this: no one has to give you love. Not a single person has to give you any love. By definition, if they had to, it would not be love anymore. So nobody has to love you. Now imagine if you actually, at the emotional core of you, actually work through that feeling that people should love you. And realize that it was a sin to feel that they should. They don't have to. And you actually started to feel that it was a sin that you were projecting at other people that they had to love you. Imagine that. Can you see, if you felt the sin that they had to love you, you would then feel that you're letting everybody off the hook for loving you. You would go through some quite big emotions about the fact that love doesn't have demands, right? And in the process of going through those emotions, you're letting go of false beliefs about love. One of those false beliefs would be love hurts, but love's only hurting if you look at the depth of this belief.
Yeah.
This is not the real belief. The real belief is that I can demand love.
Yeah, that's the flip side, isn't it?
When you say the flip side, it's the driving force of that
People are
belief.
going to hurt me, but I can demand love.
Well, the way you're saying it is even incorrect. And this is very interesting, because I have conversations with people all the time, and they say they think that what I'm saying is what they're thinking, but no, it's actually worse than this. The belief I have that I can demand love creates love hurting. Do you understand how? If I demand love and then love isn't given, now I'm going to hurt. But if I see love as a gift, when somebody stops giving it, I don't feel hurt. I just say, thank you very much for the love you gave me the last 20 years. And you don't have to love me now. You can go and love somebody else if that's what you want to do. Do you understand? A person who demands love doesn't feel that way. A person who demands love goes, you've got to marry me. You're with me till death do we part. Right? It's written in the vows. To death we, you know. And you think about that. I'm actually saying, in that very vow is saying, I demand that you love me until I die. Of course, it's really interesting. Even that comment is, when I die, I won't care anymore. That's not true either. Because if I wanted to love me till I die, I'm going to want it to love me after I die too. Unfortunately. Yeah. I'm going to demand that from her even after I die, because I'll actually still be alive. And so I'm going to continue demanding it. That makes sense to you? So here I am in the state where I've had a contract with Mary. It's written here. Can you see this document? It's horrible, right? We were talking to the minister last week, you know, who interviewed me for a position of being Jesus, and he was saying, "Are you two married?" I go, "So now this is a part of my job position too. I have to be married to Mary." And I said, "Well, yes, Mary and I are married. We were married in the first century, but it doesn't matter to me, because what matters is, does she love me in her heart? And if she doesn't, she shouldn't be with me. Simple as that. And if I don't love her in my heart, I shouldn't be with her either." In fact, the Bible even says that, interestingly enough. but most people ignore it because they're more focused on the marriage, like the contract. And the reason why they're focused on the contract is because they have the false belief. I can demand love. I can demand that you love me for the rest of my existence. Many of you have that demand going to your soulmates, that you can demand that they love you for the rest of your existence. That's why you haven't met them yet, one reason. Because it's a demand, it's unloving. Right? It repels people. If I demand that Mary loves me for the rest of my existence, I am not going to actually ever appreciate the love she actually gives me. Because I believe that she should have given it to me anyway. Right?
It's the same way with God, isn't it?
It's the same way with God. We often have the same projection of God. God, you say God loves me, then God should love me now, no matter what I do, no matter what I feel, no matter what I think, no matter what actions I take, the personal love should still keep coming. But love, God's love is a gift. When we demand it, we're saying it's not a gift, it's an expectation. And now we're not even understanding love at all, because a part of love is that it's a gift. You know, one of the very fundamental truths about love we're not facing. So the fundamental truth that we need to get an aspiration for here is that love is a gift. That's the truth. And here my belief is it's not a gift. I can demand it from somebody who says they love me for the rest of their existence. I can demand it. So we often hear from people saying, but my parents should have loved me. I'm sorry. They don't have to. Love is a gift. So they don't have to love you. Of course, we acknowledge the fact that they may not have has caused problems for you. But the fact that you demand it from them now is also your problem. Because you're out of harmony with love believing this. Make sense? So I can demand love drives the whole idea that love hurts. And that drives the whole idea that I can protect myself from it. So can you see, we're often not even anywhere near the core problem, even when we feel a certain thing. So I'm crying, I'm feeling my emotion, love hurts, oh, it was terrible. You know, Mary left me. You know, she left me for some guy down the road. Isn't it terrible? And so I'm crying, you know, about how bad it is. And every time I think of Mary, I just feel like crying again. And then every time I think about loving somebody else, I just go, oh, but I want Mary, you know, but she doesn't want me. And isn't it terrible? And, you know, so I'm crying. So I'm in this love hurts place, which is actually just a reinforcement of my false belief. Right? And so after I feel that long enough, generally, because nothing's getting released,
Then don't you?
I then develop this.
Yeah.
This other false belief.
To protect myself from love.
I'm going to protect myself from people loving me in the future.
But have you kind of nailed it the start of the process before when you said I have to connect to the pain of having the belief that love hurts? Because that's the start of this process, is it not?
Right, that would be the truth.
This belief is actually creating pain, not love, the belief is. Yeah.
But what we often do is the opposite to that.
Yeah.
When we're feeling the emotion, we're not feeling the love hurts belief is the thing causing me pain. We're often saying to ourselves, love does hurt. That's why I'm in pain. Which is not the same thing. We're saying two completely different things, logically. Right. And then we take it even further and we go, let's create another false belief to support the fact that my earlier false belief was too painful to feel. So now we've created a layer of false beliefs upon other false beliefs. Right? And people do this all the time. All the time. So we get a layer and another layer and another layer, and now when we say and then we hear divine truth and we go, oh, we've got to feel our painful emotion. So you know what happens? I start feeling my painful emotion that love hurts. So I feel that. I feel that a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. Let's say I'm humble enough to even feel it for that amount of time. After 3 or 4 months of feeling it, let's say you're crying every day about love hurting for 4 months. Huh? And then you get to the point where you realise that actually nothing's changing. Nothing's changing. And at that point you can take 2 different directions. You can go, well, let's create the belief that supports me not feeling that hurt anymore. Which is this one saying, I want to avoid this one by creating this one. I want to avoid love hurts by creating protection. If I create the protection, then I won't have to feel love hurts anymore, because I won't ever be in love again. Does that make sense? And so we create this one. So that's one direction we can take. That's an aspiration to avoid the painful emotion that we're feeling. It's a negative aspiration. It's going to lead us to a darker condition with less love in our lives. But we don't see it like that. We think it's protecting us, it's helping us. So we create it and we live in it. So that's one way. The other way is to come to the truth, which is, I think that I can demand love. And so when this person loved me and then they stopped loving me, instead of thanking them for loving me for a period of time, I'm angry with them for stopping loving me, which meant that I demanded that they love me, which meant that I didn't really understand love in the first place. Make sense? And when I start realising that, I go, what is the true belief? See, up until this point, I haven't considered what the true belief is emotionally, because I'm so embroiled in love hurts in that false belief, and then embroiled in maybe protecting myself from love because it hurts so much. I haven't even considered that the whole reason why I'm in the pain of love hurting is because of my own false belief about love. I haven't even considered that. I've just dismissed that out of hand, right? But now that I can see, I can demand love, and I go, let's look at the truth. Logically, so truthfully, is love something you can demand? When you start analysing that, you go, if I'm demanding it, then I'm not going to appreciate it as love. And also, love is a gift. It's a feeling somebody can have for me or choose not to. The fact that I'm demanding it is against the concept of free will, in that somebody can love me one moment, so it's against free will. It's saying, free will says somebody can love you today and they're allowed to not love you tomorrow. They're allowed to. Because love is a gift. So they're allowed to not love you tomorrow. But I'm thinking, no, that's not true. I want the contract. I want the marriage signed, sealed and delivered. I need the marriage. You look in your country, and in ours too, how many young women in particular aspire to be married? What does a marriage mean? It means that you're guaranteed you won't get hurt by somebody not loving you anymore. That's what they want. They want to, this belief, to retain this belief, to be guaranteed that there's no future possible withdrawal of love. But to give that guarantee, you'd have to not have will. Mm-hmm. People are allowed to choose to do what they want with their loves. And if one day they want to love you and then the next day they want to love Mary instead, they're allowed to do that, if that's what they want to do. Right? It's not even a sin for them to do that. It's not even a sin for them to one day love you and the next day love somebody else. Because their love is a gift and they're allowed to give it to whomever they want. Right? So it's not a sin for them to love someone else. And also, loves are not mutually exclusive. When I say loves, I'm not talking about romantic love now. I'm talking about other loves are not mutually exclusive. Romantic love has been designed to be mutually exclusive. But other loves have not been. Right? So what I mean by that is, romantic love, God designed through, remember we went through the design of the soul here, and we said the design of the soul was two halves. God designed that would eventually be the person you love. Right? And only that person. Romantically. Sexually. But aside from that, love can be given to, not romantic love, but other forms of love, can be given to any person and withdrawn at any time. Now, even can be given to your soulmate and withdrawn at any time. Because if it wasn't possible to do that, then it wouldn't be love anymore either. But when I say withdrawn at any time, not given to another necessarily, right? Just withdrawn. So your soulmate one day is allowed to go, I don't love you anymore. Of course, there must be reasons. And it'd probably be wise to have a look at them. But particularly bearing in mind it's the other half of you, and God designed the other half of you to like you. So if they don't like you all of a sudden, and they did before, then you've got to look at it. Is it because you're changing positively, or is it because you're changing negatively? You know, what's the reason? You'd have to look at that. But even if that is true, at the end of the day, I can't demand my soulmate loves me, because it wouldn't be love anymore if I did. So the false belief that is the opposite of this belief is what's causing my pain. It's the reason for why I'm in pain. Make sense?
Yes.
This false belief is the reason why I'm in pain, because I'm breaking a fundamental law by believing it. I'm breaking the law of free will. I'm breaking that law of believing this. So that's why I'm in pain. I'm breaking a law. Every time you're in pain, it's because you repeat after me. Every time I break a law, I am sinning. And
I'm in pain.
I will be in pain. Guaranteed. Every time. Every time. Now, the most powerful laws to break are which?
Free will.
The laws associated with spiritual principles. Remember we said that Friday, right? Yeah. Friday we said the laws associated with the spiritual principles. Love is a spiritual principle, is it not? It's the highest spiritual principle. You break a law associated with the highest spiritual principle, you're going to be in the most pain you can imagine. This is why love hurts. Because when you break the laws of love, right, this is why you believe love hurts. Obviously it's not true. You know, you break the laws of love, that is going to hurt the most. And this whole concept that love hurts, not true. The concept that's hurting me is that I am breaking the law of love. The law of love says people have free will, they're allowed to withdraw love from me. I can't demand love. Love is a gift. Right? Can you see how I can focus on that and that and that and cry about that, and then create that, which is another false belief about love. And all that's going to do is make it worse. Because now I'm breaking another few laws about the soul and emotions and protection from the very thing that brings me happiness, which is love. You know, I've got so many false beliefs about love. I'm saying love hurts, but I'm also saying now I can protect myself from it. Right? You're not protecting yourself from it. You're harming yourself by trying to do that. Right? It's another false belief. Any false belief about love is going to hurt the most, because love is the highest spiritual principle. You follow? So the average person has a lot of false beliefs about love, and they're completely unwilling to examine them. Yeah?
That's why the soul aspiration is so important.
That's right.
Toward that.
Towards that.
Examining.
Yeah, towards that. Particularly one principle. Can you see the spiritual principle of love? If you do not grasp the principles surrounding love, you are going to create for yourself the maximum amount of pain, because it's the highest principle. Right? And a belief that you can protect yourself from it, and another belief that love actually hurts, which causes you to believe you should protect yourself from it. All of them are false beliefs, and so all of them are actually the cause of your pain about love.
And of course, that's just one false belief you've given there, that I can demand love, that might be driving the love hurts belief.
Yes, only one of many.
There's many that might be driving that belief that love hurts.
Like?
Well, it can be that we've mislabeled love, can't it? This is also very common.
Okay. My version.
What others taught me was love hurts.
Yep.
So I'm holding on to a version of love and saying that hurts. So that's love and it hurts. That's love and it hurts. That's love and it hurts. Instead of examining what is my version of love, is that really love?
Is my version of love hurting?
Yes. Because often our version of love does hurt,
Yeah.
but it's not love's fault.
Yes.
Yeah.
And can we put love in quotations? Because actually love never hurts. The actual truth is love never hurts. Ever, 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 never hurts. That's the truth. So if love is hurting me, it can't have been love. You understand? It must have been love, but it's over now. There's all this anguish, right, in the message. And it's hurting them. It wasn't love you're singing about. Does that make sense? Yeah. Because if you feel hurt by it, or the withdrawal of it, then it means it wasn't love anyway. Make sense? Now, I brought up that's just one belief. One. Just one belief about love. Just one. And remember, we've said to you many times, look, it's really wise for you to look at all your beliefs about love. Can you see why? Because if you don't look at them, this is what's going to happen. If we look at this prior diagram, if we don't access the truth about something, and we're not humble about the thing, and we don't understand what love actually is, then no soul aspiration is going to develop. And if that doesn't happen, then what are you left with? Your soul condition. It's going to just stay the same. And it will stay the same as long as your aspiration does not change. That's how long it will stay the same. So people often say, how long does it take for a spirit normally to make changes in the spirit world after they pass? And sometimes I give different examples, but the basic fundamental answer is until their soul aspiration changes. Now, for some people, that's 10,000 years. Some people we know from the first century haven't changed yet. Other people, it's like 1 or 2 years because they exercised an aspiration to change, right? And their aspiration was strong, so they decided to make the change. Right? So how long you stay in your current condition is completely determined by how long it takes for you to have an aspiration for a different condition.
It's great news.
It's great news.
It's great.
Isn't that good? Yeah, it's definitely good because you have control over how long. Yeah. So up the back, if we can have a mic.
And just so you know, Jay, it's 1:30.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Mary. You said the soul aspiration is a feeling process. Does that mean that it's possible that we could have right now soul aspirations that we maybe don't know cognitively yet, that this has to do with a relationship with God?
Completely possible.
Or longing for a soulmate or passion or truth?
Completely possible, yes. Just because your mind is not able to sense something, it doesn't mean that it's not there. Your mind is really incapable of measuring emotion. So you can settle with your feelings and you would know it's there though. Right? An example of that is the minister we met on Wednesday. I could feel in him that his soul does not agree with the questions he was asking us. His soul doesn't agree. He had different aspirations in his soul than what he had in his mind. His mind aspirations were driven by his intellectual beliefs, and his soul aspirations were driven by his emotional beliefs. Right? So that's interesting. Every person you meet is like that, pretty much, where they might have aspirations in their soul that don't exist in their mind and they're not aware of. If you read the Paget messages carefully, there's many times when we've said that. Oh, that person thinks they this way, but their soul feels very differently. You see, a lot of people learn a belief system on earth, whatever the belief is, about love or about religion or some other thing. They learn that belief system and they have a lot of reasons why they want to retain that belief system. But in their heart, their emotions, they are very suspicious of their own belief systems. An example of that is the average Christian does not accept the Trinity in their heart. They just don't. They can't see it being logical. They can't see it being truthful. It doesn't make any sense to them. And in their heart, they feel God would make sense, and therefore, in their heart, they don't really believe in the Trinity. This is why they've got to argue so much for it in their mind as a belief, because in their heart, they're not even convinced themselves yet that it's true. You follow? It doesn't make any sense to their heart. In their mind, they are absolutely committed to the belief. Absolutely committed. So there's an example of where the heart is very different to what's in the mind. This is why your mind's pretty useless, right? Because at the end of the day, it has a whole heap of things in it, many of which are just indoctrinations. That they are affected by your soul condition, obviously, the emotions you're trying to avoid. So an example of that is, if I, as a Christian, believe that the Trinity is not true, and all of my family and all of my friends are Christians, and they all believe that my changing my belief on God's nature, what makes up God as a Trinity, I'm no longer accepting Jesus is God, I'm no longer accepting the Holy Spirit is God, and I just accept one God. If I do that, they will view it as blasphemy, and in many religious faiths, they will excommunicate you if you believe that. Now, can you see, in my soul I might be very suspicious of the belief. But in my mind I'm going, but if I accept what my soul is telling me about this belief, I have now got a whole heap of other soul problems to address, of all these people attacking me and my family no longer loving me and nobody caring for me anymore, and I haven't got the security of my family looking after me financially or emotionally anymore, and we can't have family gatherings because they've all excommunicated me, and I go through all of that immense amount of soul pressure, and I go, I might as well just stay holding on to the belief.
Well, I'll use my mind to convince myself that my soul suspicion isn't there. So your mind.
So I deny my soul further.
Yeah, yeah. Your mind can be a big agent of illusion in your life, depending on other soul aspirations that you have. You know, you might be invested in not seeing, wow, I really am interested in this God character, because your whole social group will think, oh, now you've got religion, how boring, you know. And so you sort of can try to deny that that aspiration is even there, because there's another aspiration to hold on to the approval of others.
Thank you, yeah.
Or to avoid their disapproval.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yes, it is true that your soul, you may not be aware at all about your soul condition or its true sense or aspiration even, right? Of course, that is only going to be made more difficult, or you say, it's easier to deny your soul aspiration the less emotion you feel. Because remember, the brain of your soul is your emotions. So the less sensitive you become to emotion, the easier you are going to find denial of the soul's feelings. Because the brain of the soul is its feelings, its emotions.
And conversely, the more you feel, the harder it's going to be to deny your aspirations.
Exactly.
They'll become very apparent to you.
Yep.
Whether they're positive aspirations or negative.
Or unloving ones, yeah. All right, well, it's probably time. It must be half past. Yeah. It's probably time for us. Now, we're not going to continue this conversation after the break. Which is the... And the reason why is because I would like you now to go away and use the next period of time before you see us again to work through this understanding of the fundamental understanding of how your soul works. Right? And encourage you to do this. So if you want to take a photo of that, just so to remind you, and obviously there's going to be some video, but we'll leave that there like this. And if you want to take a photo of that, feel free to do so in the break as well, so that you're reminded that, okay, I need to work through these things myself. And what we'd encourage you to do is over the next 11 months before we see you again, is to go, right, I need to understand some things about myself here, how I work, and I need to come to terms with things here about how I work. And then start applying that with the biggest issues in your life. Love, truth, humility, faith. Apply that with your belief about God, your belief about your soul. Apply it with those things first. See how you go with that. See what that looks like. Experiment with that. Because when we come to talk with you next time, we want to do like a 3-day discussion about sort of sin and how it affects you. And it's all based upon this. Like how to get out of sin is all based upon understanding how your soul works. Because you could say the sin is the current soul condition, right? And aspiration is the thing that has to be developed in order to get out of it, right? So if I don't understand this fundamental principle about my soul and how it works, then how am I ever going to change anything? It's going to be impossible to change anything in my life, right? So I'd encourage you to understand this, pray about it, think about it, read in the Paget messages when you read them, and I'd encourage you to read them over the next year. You will find there's so much about this in them. And when you reread them, you go, wow, now that I look at it from this perspective, I go, oh, now I know what it means by soul condition. Now I know what it means by having an aspiration or a longing. You know, now I understand what's going to drive my aspirations and longings or change them. I understand what they mean by feeling your pain and suffering and why that needs to occur so that I can make changes. You'll start to grasp many of the fundamental spiritual principles that are presented in those messages, because you start to understand how it all works internally, or how you work internally. Make sense? That's what we'd encourage you to do. You see, before we can have a more informed discussion about the matter, you need to ponder about it. You need to feel about it. You need to be more open to having the conversation about how this all works in more detail, right, in terms of changing your life. And to do that, it's going to take time. It's going to take, usually it takes a substantial amount of time, you know, more than a year generally. So this is why I'm encouraging you to do this over the next year. Experiment with this. Remind yourself of it every week. Where one thing I would suggest as a part of it, write down the beliefs you can identify right now that are obviously false. Right? And then ask yourself, what aspirations, what truth do I need to accept? How humble am I going to need to be to change those false beliefs so that they are actually not in me emotionally anymore, not just in my mind, but emotionally not there anymore. What do I do? Make sense? Because if you can start to grasp what you can do about this, then change will happen automatically, right, as you do this. And that's what we'd encourage you to do. All right, we'll have a break until,
$2:15.
2:15, shall we? Yeah, 2:15. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.